Texas Math Mundo audience, are we in store for a treat today? In the house is Dr. Michael J. Schell, the author of one of my favorite stats books, and he answers in this book, Baseball's All-Time Greatest Hitters. He uses statistics to answer who is baseball's greatest hitters. He also has an equivalent book on sluggers, and not only that, he's a cancer researcher. So he uses statistics in a broad area of academic interest, not only from the greatest hitters, but to cancer research. Dr. Michael J. Schell in the house. Let me take a quick moment and ask that if you enjoy this content, if you please hit the subscription button and the notification bell, that you leave a comment below, and that you smash that like button. I got plenty of wonderful things in store for this channel, and I really appreciate your support. Again, statistician, Ph.D., Dr. Michael J. Schell answers the question, who's baseball's greatest hitter? Right ahead. My name is Saul Cantu, and this is Texas Math Mundo. Texas Math Mundo audience, are we in store for a treat today? In the house is Dr. Michael J. Schell. Now, he is currently a senior member, Biostatistics and Bioinformatics Department, chair of the Appointment, Promotion, and Tenure Committee at the H. Lee Moffitt Cancer Center and Research Institute at Tampa, Florida. He's also a professor in the Department of Oncological Sciences, College of Medicine, University of South Florida. He has his BA in Sociology and BS in Mathematics, both magna cum laude from the University of North Carolina. He has his master's and doctorate in statistics from Florida State University. He is the author of well over 200 peer-reviewed research articles. He is the author of two very popular statistics books. The first, Baseball's All-Time Best Hitters, How Statistics Can Level the Playing Field. Also, he's the author of Baseball's All-Time Best Sluggers, Adjusted Batting Performance from Strikeouts to Home Runs. And this is just a small sampling of his accomplishments. In the house, Dr. Michael J. Schell, welcome.
Thank you so much, Saul. Just slight correction. So my undergraduate degree from North Carolina at Charlotte. Usually when you say North Carolina, you mean Chapel Hill. But I was on the faculty for 10 years at Chapel Hill. So I have a connection to both places.
Okay, good. Awesome. Thanks for that correction. So, hey, let's start off by asking, there's a lot of interesting stuff, man. I'm really fascinated with both your baseball connection to statistics and your cancer research. This is fascinating. But before we get started, let's just simply ask, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
So how are you spending your time nowadays? hobbies, interests, or are you consumed by work?
No, I have a lot of hobbies and interests, and a lot of them are about analysis of statistical stuff as well. I'm actually still getting back to doing some more baseball analysis, but also some other areas as well. But along with my work, so it's been a great career for me, statistics.
Awesome, awesome. You know, I'm in Houston, and we're riding on a baseball high as the current world champions. I do have a question. Does the world championship this year erase any stain that the 2017 championship might have had?
Well, they're two different teams, right? They're largely different players. So, I mean, this team has been good for a number of years, highly talented. This team certainly merited its World Series victory this time. We'll believe the other one as something that people can argue about.
Hey, go Astros! I know you got a Tampa Bay Ray jersey on right now. Yes, be proud.
I do. Yes.
Awesome.
So at Moffitt, one of our privileges of you're here in Tampa Bay, and they actually normally a lot of businesses will send a couple of people there to be raised for a day where you kind of learn how to pitch and throw a bit, whatever. Well, because of the connection with Moffitt, the Rays just said, send us 2 people to, and did it for a number of years. And so one of the years I was one of the 2 people that showed up, so they gave me this jersey and they put my name on the back of it.
Oh, wow.
And so that was great. And they had former major league players that also show up there. So the year I was there, Chris Chambliss, Vida Blue. I got a foul out. I got a ground out off Vida Blue, but knocked in a run. So I got an RBI off Vida Blue, but he was 62 at the time.
Wow.
He was a great pitcher for the Oakland Athletics when they won 3 championships in the early 70s, mainly against my Reds team. I was a Reds fan at that time. And then the third one is Tommy John, known for Tommy John surgery.
Wow.
So they taught me how to they tried to teach me how to pitch and throw for a day. It didn't work too well.
Wow, these are some big names back in the day. I remember. I remember Chris Chambliss with the Braves. Was he with the Yankees at one time?
Yes, he was. Quite a bit with the Yankees as well. Yeah, both.
And did Vida Blue win any Cy Youngs?
He probably did I think he probably had a 22-win season early on. I think he won a Cy Young, and then the 3 championships that they won.
Some great players, man. So you're rubbing elbows with some of the greats. That's awesome. That's awesome. So I definitely want to get into statistics. I definitely want to get into all that. But first, a little about you. Where are you from? Born and raised, and what's your cultural heritage?
Yes, I was born in Indiana, but my dad moved around a couple of times early in my life. So I grew up largely in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so my dad is from a German heritage, my mom from Polish heritage. So I'm kind of a mixture of them too.
And you were an avid sports fan, enthusiast growing up? The Reds?
The Reds, because there was no team in Charlotte, no major league team. The closest team physically would be the Braves. But my dad was from Ohio, and so I kind of just picked the Reds in 1970, early in the season, or late in '69, and they had a wonderful run of the '70s. It was so fun to watch them.
The Big Red Machine, if I remember correctly.
The Johnny Big Red Bench. Machine with Johnny Bench and Pete Rose and Joe Morgan. Tom Seaver came on later, but it was not really. It was sort of toward the end of the run.
Man, what a team! What a team! Wow. So, did you play as a youth? Do you have many fond memories associated with sports?
No, I never played. I didn't play much other than pickup. So what happened is, my love for statistics grew out of my love for just the numbers in baseball. And this is the story of a lot of professional statisticians, a lot of people with advanced degrees in statistics who say, well, if they're born in this country, so how did you get started? How did you choose statistics? It's baseball. It's baseball. It's really, and that was what it was for me. And so I developed a game, and I was in 15, 16 years old with two of my brothers. I wanted to play Babe Ruth against Tom Seaver and Johnny Bench against Walter Johnson, people from totally different areas of the game. And the way to do that would be to adjust their batting averages and so on so they could put them on what you call level the playing field. And that was really that grew into the project of my first book. And well, actually both about that.
Wow, wow. And so when did you first realize that you were talented in mathematics? When did that appear?
Probably then. I should also admit that my dad is a Ph.D. mathematician.
Really?
He was on faculty there and in the actually chair when I was over there at UNC Charlotte. And it turned out when I was in high school, I never got credit for a lot of my rudimentary math works that I was doing, homeworks and all that, because they said, your dad's helping. Finally, when I got to UNC in my third year, I was doing some differential equation stuff and I couldn't figure out what to do. I asked my dad, I said, can you help me with this? He says, it's been too long since he has done differential equations to help me with that. So by the time I needed it, could have used the help from my dad, it was too late. But obviously I think, if there's a genetic linkage or certainly an avocational thing with my dad, I inherited that love of mathematics from an early age.
Oh, wow. Did you always look at sports analytically from a mathematical perspective?
I did. Yeah. I think it was, it's just, I delivered papers, believe it or not, when there was an afternoon paper. And a lot of times the afternoon paper, the thing that everybody wanted to see with that was with the sports scores would be a key thing. You get the morning paper and the afternoon paper because you only had a half an hour on TV to watch the news or whatever. And the late games on the East Coast, they wouldn't be in the morning paper, and so the afternoon paper would have that. So I'd be delivering papers and looking at the things, and it was just something at that time with newspapers where on Sunday they would have a list of all the hitters, and it was just the numbers that were there. It was just sort of interesting to see just to see that, and then of course you pair that with watching the games and being a fan of the game.
Hey, no internet back there. There was no immediate access to information.
Right. That's right.
You needed that afternoon paper if you wanted to keep up to date. that was up to the minute information.
Yes.
Wow. Hey, so you see, is that the reason you followed statistics as a career path because of your love for sports? Was that the draw?
Yeah. When I went to UNC Charlotte, I actually got 2 degrees, a double degree. I got one in math and one in sociology. And I said, okay, what's the interface between sociology and math? And it was really statistics, And so I kind of went into statistics there for my graduate work. It was a great choice for me because a lot of times, when I was in high school, they're telling me, well, if you're good in math, you could be an actuary. An actuary didn't interest me so much or whatever. People didn't know about statistics being a career, an applied career as much at that time. And it wasn't until maybe, I'd learned about linear regression maybe as a freshman, but then I didn't have my courses in statistics till a junior or a senior. So a lot of times in the early years of college, even you don't even know about statistics much. Now we know a bit more, but it still kind of flies under the radar more than it should. I really think that there should be a lot more statistical teaching in the high school for that, and people should realize that there's very good jobs available for statisticians because a lot of healthcare, it's demonstrating findings of healthcare findings and treatments and all that, and a lot of that's numbers.
Yeah, absolutely, that's wonderful. Hey, before we get to your book, so are you also an avid fan of the college game, or is it more the pros?
More the pros, yeah. And I was at Florida State. Florida State had the greatest team that never won. Really? Yeah. I mean, they were. Mike Martin recently retired there as the coach, in a couple of years, and they probably had the best record of his 30-year career of any team in the country. But he never won. He would go to the College World Series, but wouldn't win. But it's great watching. I had great fun watching games at Florida State because the Florida State fans were crazy fans, and they when the pitcher would warm up on the side in the bullpen, he'd throw a pitch, and all the fans would go whoop, and then the catcher would throw it back and they go woo, and then whoop, woo, and then finally one time the pitcher didn't like the ball, so he kind of throws it, just lobs it over to the catcher. Catcher gets a new ball and whips it back, so they go woo, whoop, and it went the opposite direction. But it's that, and so there's and every time the manager of the opposing team would come out, all the fans would go hut, 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 hut. Just all the stuff that you try to do to rib the other team. College ball is great.
Hey, baseball, college ball, it's great. I have a question. I know for me it was. For you, was that a big bonding experience with your father?
Well, because we weren't in a baseball city, so we didn't do it that much. So in that sense, I didn't have that. I didn't have that pleasure. Now I have one child who's my daughter, and I would bring her to a lot of my games with the Rays. And she, the Rays do something where on Sundays they can run the bases. The kids run the bases. So her first big goal in life was to run the bases 7 times before she turned 7. So I guess that way I got to go to some games with her when she was young and all that.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. Wow. So I love how you want to compare players of different eras as a child or as a kid growing up. And that was the genesis of your first book, which I have right here, by the way.
Well, very good. Very good.
So in this first book, you try to determine who's the best all-time hitter. Can you define what the best all-time hitter is?
Right. So it was a very simple definition. It's the best person at getting hits. When I wrote that book, I had a lot of people that did not like that my finding, not for what it was, but they're thinking sometimes best hitter is used for best all-around hitter, talking about home runs and all that stuff. But that's not how I defined it. I defined it to be best at getting hits, which is basically batting average. Which the problem is there's a group of people that do a lot of baseball research. It's called the Society for American Baseball Research, or called SABR for short, SABR. And so I wasn't a member at the time that I first had my claim, and I joined shortly thereafter. But they did. And so at first they didn't know who I was, and they were like, "He thinks batting average is the only thing that's good for hitting, and that's how you rank them." It's like, no. You read the book on page 5, you can see I didn't say that. I did it differently. But once they knew, I've been a good member with them for now 20 years. I didn't join SABR before because I was a little bit worried that I knew it'd take me a long time to write my own book. I didn't want to either look like I was scooping someone else. So rather than being like a fly on the wall and scooping someone else, but it turned out that they wouldn't have written the book anyway because they're more focused on all around hitting, which is the second book, really is all around hitting with power, home runs built in there as well. The first book was about batting average.
So what is slugging? What is slugging?
So when a batter gets a hit, they get one of 4 kinds of hits: a single, which goes to first base, double, a triple, or a home run. And so batting average takes all those and just says that's just one hit is one hit, so that just hits over at bats. For slugging, you take singles count 1, doubles count 2, triples count 3, home runs count 4. So you add up all those points. How many bases did you hit yourself to per at bat? Oh, that's what slugging average is.
All right, great.
So then, but now what's happened is what they really want to figure out is what wins games. So what wins games is runs. Runs wins games. If you can produce 10 more runs than the next player over, that leads to 1 more win. So 10 runs equals 1 win essentially, and there's a way to actually figure all this out with the regression. There's one way to do it. Singles are worth about 0.47 runs, and doubles are worth 0.73 runs, and so on and so forth. And walks are worth 0.33 runs. And so you add up all the credits, and then you take all the plate appearances, and that's called linear weights. Okay, but that is very close. Is very closely approximated by on base percentage, which is basically not batting average only. It's batting average plus walks plus hit by pitch over the total of those. And then slugging, which is we talked about with the 1 for a single, 2 for a double. So it's on base plus slugging, OPS. And so now if you go to a ballpark, you may see they'll have people's OPSs. And And that OPS is a poor man's version. It's very close, though, to this linear weights, careful calculation of what scores runs. So whoever has higher OPS produces more runs.
This is sounding a lot like Moneyball.
Yeah. Well, that was the big thing that Moneyball found was everybody was focusing on batting average. That was what was in the newspapers and all that, but that didn't have the walks. And so let's say that somebody's batting 300 and someone's batting 270. You say, oh gosh, you got 30 points on that. But the guy that's batting 300 only gets 3% walks or 4% walks. The other guy gets 12% walks. He's beating him on 80 points on the walks by losing 30 points on the hits. And so that's better. It's better. So what Oakland, the A's found was players that could walk really well, but didn't have the high batting average, were being undervalued. And so they said, well, let's buy those players because we're not the Yankees or the Red Sox, but we can, if we figure out how to get players that can compete that they don't even know about, they're cheap, but we can buy them cheap and get them on our team and win games. And that's what they did.
Wow, fascinating, interesting. So, for the big moment for the audience, who is the best hitter of all time?
So the best hitter, or maybe called the best pure hitter of all time, is Tony Gwynn.
Tony Gwynn.
Wow. Tony Gwynn played his entire career for the San Diego Padres from, I think, 1982 to somewhere 1997, somewhere in there. Yeah.
You know, I have his rookie card, just so you know.
Sorry, what?
I have his rookie card, just so you know.
Oh, I bought it too. Good. Before I actually published my idea, I thought, let me go buy a card because the value is going to go up.
So what variables did you control for? Because usually it's Ty Cobb or what variables did you control for?
Yeah. So it turns out a lot of people think you have to control for a lot more things, that you have to know a lot of things, and you don't have to actually know a lot of things as a statistician. So what you have to first thing to think about is batting average. For the league, how the entire league bats. I started following baseball in 1969, and they deliberately did something in '69 that I read about in the Street and Smith magazine to raise the batting average. So you can sort of see it's an adjustable thing. What they did was the pitching, the batting had gotten down to 230 in the American League. It was kind of it was getting boring, so people didn't want to go as many because people weren't getting hits. So they lowered the pitching mound that was otherwise 15 inches above the level of the rest of the field to 10 inches. That reduction of 5 inches didn't allow the pitcher to drive the ball down in the bottom of the strike zone as much. And so batting average jumped about 10, 12 points. So it's clear. So I happened to be starting out when that was done. And so you look and you find out also in the 1920s and 30s, batting average even got to 300 was an average batting average in one season. And so if you don't, you clearly have to adjust for that. You have to adjust for that. So people knew about that. So that's what I was doing in high school, was adjusting for batting average. But also when you do that, we found some things problematic. And that is when you do that, the early hitters just look better in the way that the modern hitters can't look as good. And so I knew something was wrong with that. I mean, something had to be done more than that. So we said, the average batter probably wasn't as good as the average batter now. Okay, so we kind of lowered that. But how do you actually quantitate that in a more objective way? And so when I was in graduate school in statistics and we're learning about the variance, I'm thinking, that's the answer. It's how they vary. When you have teams when you have good players that are really, really good and really, really bad, you'll have bigger variability. And so that's gonna be how you can measure the spread of the player talent in the year. And so it turned out that somebody else had already beat me to the punch. Somebody named Stephen Jay Gould, who'd actually published something on this whole thing too. He used it for evolutionary thinking, how sometimes early in evolution there's a lot of variability, and then evolution kind of collapses on on all that. Same is true when baseball gets to be more and more of a career that people can think about. This is going to last. It's not just going to be a little fly-by-night sport. That more and more people wanted to be players, and they could get better players in, and they narrowed the talent between the top and the bottom. So it's basically, for statisticians, that's just what we call the first and the second moments. That when you look at a distribution, there's all these moments: the first, the second, the third. The first one's the mean. Everybody was doing that. The second one was the variance. So that was the adjustment that kind of got the talent pool pretty much or much closer. The third one is ballpark. Bill James was out doing stuff at this time, and he basically said, "Parks make a difference." And I'm thinking, I sure hope not, because I don't know how to adjust for it. And I started getting data. Data was not so easy to get, even to produce. It's like, as I look at it more, darn, he's right. But so how do you actually do it? So I came up with a way to estimate ballpark differences, that using statistics to actually estimate ballpark differences. And that's the third one. The fourth one is one that not a lot of other people do. I'm maybe unique that way. Is I stop at 8,000 at bats. Most players never get 8,000 at bats in their entire career, and if they don't, that's too bad. But Hank Aaron got to 12,000 at bats. Okay, well, he was, when you're really going into your late 30s, early 40s, a lot of times your averages go down. And so I was not looking at who's smart enough to retire in time before their numbers drop. I just, if I really want to compare them, let me compare them over a pretty long career structure, but look at that time and not let the late at bats hurt you.
Man, there's so much in what you just said, man. There's just so much. I know I've heard about hitters' parks and pitchers' parks, and then you write about the dwindling performance as time goes on, and man, there's so much. Talking about 8,000 at bats, you talk about seeing Tony Gwynn at his 8,000th at bats. Can you tell us about that experience?
So because 8,000 at bat was one of my four things, I wanted to be there. And I was in North Carolina at the time, but I flew over to San Diego to watch 4 games when he was scheduled to get his 8,000th at bat, which he did, the third game of that set. And because that basically was the end of that. That's the end of what counts. But in this adjusted world between him and Ty Cobb, it was really close with this thing, where it was like 2 weeks earlier, he had got the clinching hit by my calculations. Okay. So it turned out that the day of his 8,000th at bat, which is going to be his third at bat of the day, the press people had already met me. So they told me I can come early, go in the dugout. We're going to see if we can get Tony Gwynn to show up, talk to you. No promises. I said, okay, fine, I'll take that. So I went to the dugout, and I don't see any of the press people there. And Tony's doing batting practice. And meanwhile, he's actually putting his bat back in the rack. He's walking right in front of me. And so I said, "Hi, Tony, I'm Michael Schell." He said, "So you're the guy." Because what happened is we had sent a press release like 3 weeks earlier. So he already knew about this. It was actually in the paper. It was a third-page article in the paper that morning or the morning before. And so he knew about me. And so then we, so we talked just a little bit. And then he left. And they said, "I've got something for you." And I thought, so then they called me up to the locker room, and what he had for me was this bat.
Wow, Tony Gwynn bat.
And he actually said that there's hits on this bat. Okay, you can actually see you can see here and see that the marks. That's from a hit that he got.
Is that game used bat?
It's a game used bat. Yeah.
Wow.
So game used bats are bet in there. And basically, he said he has racing stripes. He did it himself. I don't know if you can see. I've got my blurb thing on, so it's hard to hold it right. But, Tony Gwynn hardly ever broke his bat. The actuals report that 1 year he didn't break his bat all year long. Most people break a bat like once a week because he was so talented to not hit, barrel it up right so that he wouldn't break the bat, even as thin as the handles are. And so. And when I went there, he was batting like 394 in late June or something.
Wow.
And so he was that week, he was on the cover of Sporting News and Sports Illustrated. Sports Illustrated said he's the best hitter since Ted Williams. And they were only looking at batting average, not all around. And I went to say, "No, you're the best hitter in spite of Ted Williams."
Wow.
But for average, he's the best. And and so he actually was a very humble man. He says, I appreciate that. And I said, well, I'm here because I believe this, and I wanted to be able to see you and see you with the hit. He got a single on that at bat.
Really? Wow, yeah, that's poetic. That's awesome. That's awesome. Tony Gwynn, I remember Tony Gwynn very well. He's a little deceptive because, he looked a little pudgy or whatever. He was like a little mix, but he was actually deceptively athletic. Wasn't he like a multi-sport college star?
Well, yeah. He played basketball in college. Yeah. And then he was actually pretty slender in his early playing days. He stole quite a few bases in his early days, but he did put on weight or whatever, but he actually took videos of all his at-bats, studied all his at-bats. I mean, he actually really applied his craft in a strong way to do what he did. And he had a style that was sort of more of a singles hitter, but let him do it to stand back hitting there and do an inside-out swing and other kinds of things that would actually, where he would be a left-handed hitter, but hit more of his hits to the right side, between the shortstop and the third baseman. They called the 5.5 hole. That was where he made his money. But he grew up near San Diego, and Ted Williams was also a San Diego boy as well. He played for the Red Sox, was in San Diego. So Ted Williams and Tony Gwynn got together at some point, and Ted told him that basically sometimes you shouldn't go just only for, you should go for home runs too. When you're really sing it really well, pop it, okay? And that year, I think Tony Gwynn had 20 home runs, okay? So he took a tip from Ted Williams, and then showed he also could really drive the ball when he wanted to.
Wow. Hey, just out of curiosity, to round out the discussion, do you remember who the top five were? Tony Gwynn number one, Ty Cobb number two?
Tony Gwynn number one, Ty Cobb number two, Rod Carew number three, played for the Twins primarily in the Angels, the 60s, 70s. Rogers Hornsby, four. He won five. He had 4 years, I think, or 4 or 5 years when he averaged 400 in the early 20s when hitting was very high. And the fifth one, I think, is Wade Boggs.
Oh, wow.
So I have, so I actually got it. I met with Wade Boggs as a consequence of my book, and Tony Gwynn. I tried to see Rod Carew. It turned out I was going to, but then something happened the day before with one of the players, and they canceled the meeting that way. Ted Williams. I mean, so I never. Actually, Ted Williams maybe near 5 or 4 or 5, but I never met Ted Williams. Or Ty Cobb died in 61. So.
How about sluggers? Who's the number one slugger? I'm just curious.
Babe Ruth, and then number 2 is Ted Williams.
Oh wow!
So my second book was that, and there's actually a cartoon that someone else had made, and I was actually able to use in my book. I got permission to use it, where it almost like a Olympic stadium, where number 1 Ruth, number 2 Williams, because that was what everybody thought, and then number 3. Mays, Aaron, everybody's fighting for number 3. That's the question, was who was to be number 3, and it was Rogers Hornsby that did it. Now, even with both books, the variance thing doesn't perfectly adjust for talent pool. So I think there's more adjustments that are needed, and probably he would drop down. And of course, also when I did that second book, even Barry Bonds had not finished his career. Barry Bonds, it's argued, he's got the steroids that are going there against him, but from the numbers standpoint, he's arguably in those top 3 with Ruth and Williams, if you ignore steroids issues.
You bring up a very interesting point there. So do we just blot out that error or what?
I don't think we should. And the other thing is this, okay? If let's say that half the top home run hitters were using steroids and half of them weren't, and so that the ones that were getting 5 to 7 to 10 home runs more, then that's a great unfairness. But if they all were using steroids, which sometimes that's the kind of view that all of them were, then if you actually adjust statistically, then you correct for the problem. Okay, so like Mike Schmidt, who might have won home run championships with 37 and 40, and Hank Aaron had a bunch in the low 40s, where then they're doing it 55 and 60 later on. The adjustments sort of say, hey, home runs are way up in this era. For whatever reason, they're up. We just move them all down. So again, if all of them all the home run hitters were basically taking steroids, and that's almost where we've gone. Bagwell had a hard time getting into the Hall of Fame early, there, and you've got Manny Ramirez, and you've got McGuire, and the whole host of them that were hitting a lot of home runs at that time have been tainted sort of, with the thoughts of steroid use, if not knowledge of that. So if that's the case, then the adjustments work, and certainly adjustments will work, to clean up most of the problem.
Wow.
So that's otherwise you can fault them for doing things problematically, but there's been other cases in baseball history where people did things that they shouldn't have done as well. Where there's accusations about Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker that they maybe threw some game or looking to throw some games or whatever in the late 20s and all that, but that Ty Cobb had some dirt on the commissioner, and so therefore the commissioner didn't charge him with anything or whatever. So I mean, there's other things as well. So
man, what a fascinating sport! What's a fascinating history? All that's great. All that's fascinating, man. And I love how you bring mathematics to bear. So now when we have arguments, at the bar about who's the greatest hitter, man, I can cite you. I can cite you. I can say, hey, I got mathematics on my side.
Well, yeah, I'm a member of the American Statistical Association, and I've been going to conferences for most of the time for the almost 40 years now. But it turned out that they actually have a section of the ASA called the Statistics and Sports section. I didn't sign up. I didn't join that when they set it up, because I didn't want to be kind of known as just being a sports guy. In fact, I was kind of like a closet sports guy, in terms of doing this until this book kind of rose the top, because I wanted to establish my credentials also for the applied work I do, which is primarily in cancer research. But really, that section is really about math education. It's about what you do is you take something that is probably the best known data set in America, and you're doing something statistically with it. And normally what happens is people will, with statistics, statistics, I don't know it. But when you sort of say, okay, Ted Williams gets pulled down because he played at Fenway, which is good for hits for hitters, and they're saying, they're like, what are you doing? Why are you taking the points away from how much? And they want to argue with the statistical thing. They're not arguing that you shouldn't do anything at all. They're just arguing whether what you. So, but you've got them engaged and they also know the data. They know the data really well, and so it actually spurs people's ability to think statistically, because a lot of people can think reasonably well statistically, and they have to realize, don't be afraid of math. Don't be afraid of this. Embrace it.
As a high school teacher, I appreciate that. Real world context matters. And if you can get some data sets that they're passionate about, that's half the battle, man. Now they want to learn it.
Yeah. That's really how the profession has treated this one section. It's about education. It's about education.
Awesome. So I do want to transition. It's one thing to sit at a bar and argue about the best hitter of all time. That's levity. That's fun. It's half the time those debates will be unsettled forever. But you actually apply statistics to much more a situation, much more gravity to it. You actually do cancer research. Do you apply those same methods across the board? Can you describe your cancer research for us?
Yeah, well, that's the beautiful thing about statistics, is actually allows you to be a dilettante. That you can sort of float in different areas of work. That a lot of the ideas of statistics actually apply in multiple different fields. And so it turned out that when I finished up at Florida State, I got hired first by St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. So that was my first job was there, and that kind of set my career going in cancer. Because once you kind of choose an area of application, you could switch over to work on cardiovascular disease or diabetes or mental health disorders or like that. That's possible. but you gain subject area knowledge as well. And then sometimes the field has certain kinds of techniques that are used more, and so you actually are more valuable if you sort of stay within a given medical area if that's where you're going. And that's what happened to me. It just sort of my dissertation was sort of had a cancer topic too, but it was really more math and stochastic process and all that. But when it was almost like partly by accident where you go, or maybe the avocation. I actually wanted to do something that would be involved in math or statistics and biology. So I was looking for that, and I got that, and it's been fun. So I actually have a couple of papers here. I just tee up. I don't know if I should do that.
Yeah, please do. Share with us some of that interesting, because that cancer research. Yes.
So here's a paper in which I'm a first author on, which is on mammography, and in this case, when you go to a radiologist, they for women they have what's called a screening mammogram, where they don't know that they have any cancer at all. They're just saying, do I have a cancer? And then you will work up. You do a workup on them and an image, and you kind of say, there's something suspicious here on this image that maybe it might be cancer. And you give it a number like 0 through 5, called the BI-RAD score. If it's 1 and 2, it basically says, no, you don't really have cancer. We don't think don't need it. You come back. In this country, we do it every year. In Europe, they do it every other year, typically. 3 is kind of come back in 6 months. 4 and 5 are there's something more on you. I think you need to come back and check further on this right away. And what's called a diagnostic mammogram, a second mammogram. Yeah. The 0 is kind of weirdly in between a 3 and a 4. It's kind of like it's kind of an indeterminate thing that's there. That kind of maybe short term as well. So what the picture here on the left, the figure on the left, shows actually different radiologists. So you see this big circle here. That's one radiologist, and that circle represents how many patients that radiologist did screening mammograms for. And overall, that person said to about 6% of the women, I think something's going on. You need to come back right away to look at it, do a diagnostic mammogram. And what we can do by tracking data is not, there's a lot of catchment to do this, but let's suppose you told certain women, that you told the 94% of the women, you're fine. Some of them would have had cancer within the next year as it is. So you're not going to find every single cancer that through the screening process is not 100%. And so what's considered how good it is the sensitivity. He caught 75% of the cancers. Wow. Okay. So here, he's still missing 25% of the cancer. Sometimes it's because cancers can grow so fast that maybe, that there was nothing to be seen. And then 8 months later, it's there and it shows up. Okay. So it's not that they always messed up. It's more often that they didn't actually, but it's something you can't catch them all. Yeah. And so this is another radiologist here. There's another radiologist. Some of these little dots are radiologists as well, but they're just small things. So it's kind of the dot represents how many they saw. And then what I did was to fit what's called monotonic regression, where essentially it's a series of level steps. It's kind of flat and then jumps. So basically, this is sort of our estimate that says if you recall about 3% or less of women, your sensitivity will be about 53%. And then for this little group, it's this percent, and so on and so forth. So the method has to be flat with jumps. That's the way it works. But then what I did was to do a join of the median here, where you can kind of actually then look at it as being a piecewise linear fit here. Okay. And showing that the more people you recall, the more you'll find the cancer. Okay. Well, if you recall 100%, you can find 100% of the cancer, yeah. But the problem is that's impractical. So you're trying to actually keep the recall rate down while catching most of the cancers, and this is just showing you the trade-offs. At any one time, only half of 1% of women will have cancer. So if you're recalling 10% of the women, you're going to you can tell 20 women, better go back when they're only going to find one that actually has cancer. And even then, the second diagnostic mammogram is not also definitive either. If they're still suspicious, then they'll come back for a biopsy, and then if the biopsy can't remove it all, then you go for surgery. So it's a multi-step process. But what people wanted to know was actually how this curve looks like, so that you can actually make decisions off this curve. And so this is sort of the I kind of took those linear segments and made and came up with slopes. It's the standard slope of a line that basically sort of shed that if in this little range you're working up 20 from going from here to here, you have to work up sort of marginally 29 more women to find one more cancer. Okay, so if you're a radiologist that practices up here rather than practicing down there, that's the trade-off. You're saying, well, where normally the early ones you can find a lot with even low percents of recall, but as you move up the ladder, it's getting harder and harder. I mean, people that say, okay, well, this person wants to practice over here at 7%, the other person's practicing at 12%. The person that's practicing up there is working up among that group of people that's sort of in between that 7 and 12 range. 132 more women are being told you got something going on to find one cancer, right? And so part of the decision of what recall rate you need to be at, we now can quantitate the find rates by these different, over these regions.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's indicated by the lower slope, right? Like a diminishing returns type thing?
Correct. That is correct. That's correct. And so, in fact, whereas Europe actually recommends practicing more in 5% or less, they were doing this even before my paper was concerned, because there's costs involved with all this workup stuff, and you're doing all those workups, and then you're working women up too. They're like, oh, I got cancer, and they actually don't. And so there's trade-offs that are there. In the U.S., we practice more around 10%, and I've heard that the reason why that's done is because lawsuit protection. Okay, in Europe, it's done through the government. They're kind of government-run healthcare systems, and you can't really sue them so easily and all that. And so they practice down in a kind of a rate because they're thinking this is diminishing returns. But there are people here that practice way up here, recalling lots of women just so that you won't sue them,
Wow,
and so you've got to. Yep. So that's a trend. So that's that paper. And I don't know what the time. I'm going to show you one more thing. So one of my big projects, and I'm toward the end of my working career. But as an applied statistician, what bothered me the most was the fact that it's so hard to keep up with the literature. There's been 100,000 papers that have been published in statistics over the last 120 years, and there's hundreds coming out every year, and I don't have time to read hundreds of papers every year. So every paper wants to say, read me, but I can't do all that. So how do I actually make a decision which ones to read, and how do I do that? And the sad answer is, of course, a lot of us don't do that as much as we should. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we don't practice as well as we should. As a practitioner, I want to be able to offer the docs that I'm working with and science that I'm working on the most powerful techniques I can use, but I can't use them. I can't use them if I don't know them. And so how do you know them? So what I did was to grab out of since we now tabulate a lot of stuff and so on, this is in something called the Web of Science, where they have a tabulation of the citations of papers year to year to year. And so I grabbed the most prominent 4,000 papers. I said, okay, great. I've limited your problem. Okay. From the 100,000, all you have to do is read 4,394 papers. Here they all are. Read them all. That's still way too many for people to read. Yeah. So I then had to classify. We had to classify by hand every one of these papers. Okay, we created a system with a just like you do like Linnaeus did for biology, a kingdom, a phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So there's only 6 kingdoms. Okay, this is one is called broad topics. There's 55 phyla now. Phyla have to be at least like 25 papers in a group to be a phylum. And then there's about 200 classes. You have to have at least three papers here in order to be a class. And then the fourth one can be nearly a unique identification of the paper. And then the last three things are more stylistics on the paper, as far as is it a Bayesian paper versus a frequentist paper? Is it a commentary? Is it theory? Is it modeling? And then the last one is who's using it the most. And that's also grabbed from the data of who's citing the paper.
So I bet you a practitioner or a researcher would be so grateful to have their hands on this document.
I'm hoping so. We're hoping to get that out real soon. So one we talked about before we got on together here was in this area of foundations. One of the things that's getting really popular now is the discussion about p-values themselves. Are p-values viable things or not viable things? Or sometimes they've been overly used, and so some people say just don't use them at all. Then, well, I don't think that's the right answer. But you should use them in conjunction with other things, because the more data you have, the more likely the p-value is looking for two means to be exactly the same. Well, the more data you have, you'll find out they're not exactly the same, but they may be so close that who cares, right? And so there's a practical significance that's there, but there's discussions about this. So these are all the papers that are there. And just like for baseball players, I've got all these metrics on them. Well, how many papers are being cited per year? This is big. You can't maybe say you see it in the red here, but 2,425 citations in 1 year for this paper. Okay, this paper is being cited 29 times. But I also can show, are they going up? Or are they going down? I've got colors on all these things too. These guys are going down. So they're in decline phase. But,
like a heat map.
But what we've done is we've kind of narrowed it that says, okay, if that's what you're interested right now in looking about, you're now down to like 20 papers. If I classify it all well, those are the papers you have to worry about. All the rest of the papers, the other 4,000, who cares about them for right now?
Wow.
So,
wow. Very useful document.
Yeah.
And so how are researchers and practitioners going to get a hand on this document?
Well, hope so. I mean, we're getting more and more people do. Yeah, I'm sure there are some that will be able to handle that. And I've actually we have a way. Some of this stuff takes too long to discuss at this time, but actually of these 2,000, well, this one actually has 2,447 papers citations per year. I figured 24, 25 are applied uses, 22 are theory. Okay, so some papers are more prominent in theory, where the theory people are doing. These are important papers too, but those are papers that the academics care about, because they're trying to develop the ideas further. I'm an applied person, so while I can get the overall count, I'm looking for a count in this zone. Okay, it's kind of like looking for, maybe you're looking for a home run hitter today in the baseball world, right? So you're looking. This is what I want as an applied statistician: is what papers are really getting out there and being used by practitioners, because that's going to help me. Because even here, I might say, okay, I can't even read all these papers. I might focus on the ones that are the highest counts, or some area of, or I can look over here and say, well, let's see, these are commentaries. So there's a lot of this area is a lot of commentaries. They're just argumentation. And this is the major area that they're being discussed in. So since I'm in medicine, I might say, this is medicine general, this is medicine neurology, that maybe these papers are ones here that my particular colleagues are most focusing on. So you have different ways of kind of homing in on. This is like being a talent scout, right? It's being talent scout not for players, it's being a talent scout for papers, right? Which papers do I want to focus on to kind of look at to improve my practice? And it's improved my practice since I've been working on this. It's been several years. It's been about 5 or 6 years in just doing all this, to just build all this, even just to create this kind of a classification system.
I can only imagine. That's great stuff, Dr. Schell. That's great stuff, man. I love how you've apply statistics to like sports, to cancer research. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, yes.
I'd like to ask, given your broad perspective, given all your your experience and your delving into this, I want you to give some advice to some people.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can you bring yourself back on the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not on the screen. Okay.
No problem.
Okay.
All right. That way you can look right into the camera and give these people some advice here. So,
Yes.
let me adjust you a little bit here. Give me a second. All right, cool. Now, what advice would you have because I have a lot of high school students who are in competitive mathematics come across this channel and pay attention. What advice would you give these kids in high school who are into competitive mathematics, either about life advice or math advice or both? What do you got for them?
Well, if you love math or whatever, look at statistics. It's a great way for math to be applied today. Actually, at the Moffitt Cancer Center, we actually have a creative group, one that's fairly unique so far. It's called Integrative Mathematical Oncology. There are actually mathematicians that are actually looking at oncology. Statisticians kind of do it more with data and regression lines and so on. Mathematicians are so precise with almost trying to understand the mechanism. So they're almost at the cellular and subcellular levels and looking at little things and formulas and all that, almost like physics of biology. And so it's almost like we're coming from opposite poles, okay? Trying to maybe, because they're trying to explain everything, right? They're going to try to almost like turn it into, almost get rid of all the variation that's there. When we deal with variation, I'd say one of the difference between, like for example, Einstein, who did, or I say, go back to Newton. Newton says force equals mass times acceleration, right? That's more of a mathematical claim. Now, statisticians say, well, force equals mass times acceleration plus error. Okay, and all of our work is about the error, about this thing. What's the error? And because sometimes that formula, in this case, that formula was true with a fit of 999 out of a possible 1, where we're doing a lot of stuff in biology where our fits are maybe only 45%. R squared are only 45%, which means we can explain 45% of the variation in the data through the variables we have. So where's the other 55%? And so we're always trying to work on this and improve stuff and try to explain more and more. So there's room for both mathematicians and statisticians in the healthcare field. So pursue that. The other part of it is, and I thought about this too. I thought about taking a break between high school and college and going off and and playing guitar for a year, which I didn't play before. I've never played. I never did that. But turns out that sometimes it's very hard to kind of sometimes leave school and come back. And so one of the things is just pursue it and you get there, because also as you get older, sometimes you want to get married and you have a family and things like that. Life gets in the way. Whatever life means, life gets in the way, and you're almost better off to get your schooling through, because a lot of other people get PhDs much later. Math is the youngest age for PhDs. I think it was like an average age of 29 when I was getting out. I got mine at 27. The youngest is like 35, 35 for fields and 40 in business and whatever. You can actually, go out and do things and come back and get your PhD in business. It's very hard in math because it's so intensive. You need that discipline of having someone over your shoulders to make sure you're working those problems and thinking that stuff to do it, that time. And so you just have to kind of buckle down and just do it. And the other part of it is if you're able to go to the higher areas like PhD, you open up more opportunities for yourself. Sometimes if you stop at a master's degree, you may get slotted into a career a bit where you're doing the same thing many times over, and you kind of can get a little bored that way. But the more you move forward, there's a lot of opportunity now in masters for sure, even a bachelor's, because this data science, it's moved on to this data science thing. So there's a lot of opportunity, but whatever you do, you'll gain more opportunities the higher you go up in your training.
Hey, that's some good stuff there. That's some good stuff. Sooner better than later, further better than, say, yeah, exactly. Good stuff. So what lessons do you hope are imparted upon people that read your works?
Well, again, my career for the most part has been about cancer. And again, most of the readers of that would not be statisticians; they would be clinicians. And what what I've hoped it had done. You try to, and I've prided myself on to try to do the best to be a strong player. Again, let's go back to the baseball analogy. It's kind of like I'm maybe like the shortstop on the team, but if you don't have a good shortstop, a lot of the balls go through that direction. So I'm trying to hold up this, and we play a very important role in the science. In science, we're almost like, in the good sense, either police officers or lawyers or whatever. I mean, we're trying to holding on to the rules of science and trying to educate even the clinicians to do this. And so if I've done good work, then science gets advanced, and that translates into lives, improved lives for patients, and that's what you do. And I started off the first 7 years at St. Jude, and there's hardly a more tangible reward than doing something for children's cancer. But for example, one of the things I got into early on was looking at hearing loss, and they were giving a drug cisplatin for a variety of children's cancers. And the more they would give, the more hearing loss you have. It doesn't completely cause all your hair cells to do, but the outer hair cells, whatever, would die. And so it makes it harder to hear and so on. Enjoy music there, but also if you're younger, even speech and all that. And it turns out that radiation exacerbated the problem. And so at some point, based on work I had done back at that time with paper I was involved with, it went the opposite way. The question was, well, a patient who had radiation first, then cisplatin, is it better if they have their cisplatin very soon after the radiation, or not? And it turned out that the answer was yes. That if it's farther back with the radiation, changes already occurred in your ear, and then with that delay, you'd have more hearing loss if radiation was 6 months or more in behind you. And so they were treating children 3 years old had brain tumors and putting radiation and cisplatin right together based on that work that we did. And so you're playing a role. You're playing a role in science.
Wow. So, what does the future hold for you?
Well, more analysis. I'm actually one of the projects I'm doing on my own is actually the most influential people of all time.
Really?
Okay, and in this case, it's a different kind of thing where there's people that have rated people in history, and then you can kind of combine together, and you can see how consistent are their ratings, how often where they differ, and you can find sometimes when someone rates someone a lot higher, they're what I call an advocate, and when they vote them all down, vote them much lower, they're a naysayer. This happens in movies too, right? There are movies, one of the greatest movies and all that kind of stuff. And then somebody wants to somehow elevate some mediocre movie to the number 4 position by some kind of advocacy.
Well, this is interesting. You mean like Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan?
Yes, exactly.
Really?
So Hitler kind of barely out, he outdoes Gandhi, and someone's like, God, that's so unfortunate or whatever that Hitler beats Gandhi. He's influential. Well, he's influential. Okay, in some ways, unfortunately, Hitler, millions of lives were lost because of his bad thinking. Okay, and so yes, it's looking at which people, because also like anything else, it's back to education. It's hard to know about all the people in history. So if I can't know about all of them, if I can only know 10, if I learn more about 10 presidents, which 10 should I learn about? Okay. And so it's statistics. It's about, in some ways, reducing a lot of data to sort of small things. If something is distributed normally, it sort of says, if I've got 10,000 data points in their like blood pressure and for healthy adults, and it's normally distributed, if I just know the mean and standard deviation, I know the structure of that data. And so I've reduced 10,000 data points to 2 numbers. And so history is a lot less compressible, but it's a problem. We can't, how do we keep up with the version of history? Well, let's focus on the most important people in history. Let's focus on the most important papers in science. So somehow we have to be able to deal with not covering everything, but reducing it. You probably haven't read all the books behind you. You probably know which are the most important books that are there, that somehow that you've identified. These are the most important books that get more attention than the other ones.
Well, I'll tell you, I look forward to that book. I look forward to that book. You know what I'm saying? That's interesting. It's really fascinating how you apply statistics across such varied areas. Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Any parting words or final thoughts as we conclude this interview?
Well, it's a big thank you for inviting me. It actually was an honor to get your call to invitation to do this. And I like the project where we're at. Is that statistics is a fun career. It's a wonderful career for people, and sometimes if you're good in math, it's actually well. I have a lot of colleagues that are PIs, principal investigators of studies. I'm an epidemiologist, and they have to write grants that mostly get rejected. We only about 10-15% of the grants that are sent to the NIH get accepted. You can sometimes polish them up and try them again and things like that. And they, in their lives, their careers sort of sink or swim on how well they do it. As a statistician, I work a little bit on this grant, a little bit on that grant, a little bit on that grant. And so it's an easier life actually if you're a statistician than if you're an epidemiologist, okay? Because we're the co-eyes, and you just have to be competent in what you're doing. And then you can look at, and then you also get to see lots of different areas of scientific research rather than some of you guys are focused on that area, some of us focused on that area. In the statistician, you can see all the areas. Somebody says, as a statistician, you get to play in everybody's backyard.
That's
and
awesome.
So it's a wonderful life. I highly recommend people who have the skill to think about being a statistician.
Awesome. Dr. Schell, years ago, I came across this book. It really caught my eye. I really was fascinated by it. I was like, wow, how interesting. So I'm so appreciative that you come onto my channel and share with my audience the beauty of what you do, the beauty of statistics across a varied landscape. And so I'm just so appreciative. I'm in Houston. You have a friend in Houston now. We can always, if you ever find yourself where we can go to Minute Maid Park, check out an Astros game.
That sounds like a plan. Hey, if I do, I will certainly look you up.
I appreciate that. You certainly have a friend over here, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your story with us.
It's my pleasure to be with you and with your audience, and just again celebrate the joy of for those of us that are kind of numerate. It's really there's a lot of fascinating jobs out there, so just look for them.
Awesome. Take care, Dr. Schell, and farewell.
Okay, thank you so much.
Wow, what a fascinating discussion with Dr. Michael J. Schell. Thank you very much, Dr. Schell. It was a fascinating discussion of how statistics applies to answer such questions as who's the greatest hitter in baseball, to some very deep questions involving cancer research. That was such a fascinating discussion. I appreciate it. Let me take a quick moment and ask that if you enjoy this content, that you please hit the subscription button and the notification bell, that you leave a comment below, and that you smash that like button. I got plenty of wonderful, beautiful things in store for this channel, and it really helped me spread my content. I really appreciate your support. My name is Saul Cantu, and this is Texas Math Mundo. Farewell.